Welcome to the Allison Knows podcast. Today we are going to dive deep into something that's really relevant and super complex, and that is the lasting effects of racial discrimination in America.
Yeah.
Specifically focusing on the Jim Crow era and its legacy.
Okay.
You've given us a really amazing set of sources for this deep dive.
Right.
Court cases,
Right.
personal stories, historical analyses.
Wow.
So it's a really multi-dimensional.
It is. Having all those different perspectives, I think, is crucial.
Yeah.
Having the legal rulings that show you the kind of formal structure of discrimination,
Right.
but then to have personal accounts
Yes.
really illuminates what life was like.
Exactly. And one story
Mm-hmm.
from the source material really struck me.
Okay.
It's about the author's experience as a Black 13-year-old in 1970
Okay.
in Beverly Hills,
Wow. Beverly Hills.
of all places.
That's fascinating that this would happen there.
He's exploring his new neighborhood on his bike, gets stopped by two white police officers
Just for riding his bike.
just for riding his bike in Beverly Hills.
A symbol of affluence.
I know.
Right. And to have that occur, that really highlights how pervasive
Exactly.
racial assumptions were.
The officers question him,
Wow.
assume he doesn't belong,
Right.
warn him about a curfew.
Mm-hmm.
But later, he finds out from his white friends who've lived there for years.
Oh, wow.
They've never even heard of such a curfew.
So they made it up.
It really exposes the invisible ways discrimination operates even in supposedly progressive environments.
Yeah.
What's fascinating about this to me is how easily things like this can happen without anyone even realizing it.
Right. It speaks to the deeply ingrained nature
Yeah.
of racial categorization in American history.
Right.
From the very beginning,
Yeah.
there was this presumption of Black inferiority
Right.
that kind of permeated legal and social structures.
And the sources really illustrate that they detail early legal cases, like Hudgens v. Wright from 1806. What I found really shocking was that this case established a presumption of slavery for anyone with African features, requiring Black individuals to prove their freedom.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling how that burden was placed on them.
That case really set a precedent,
I know.
didn't it?
Yeah.
It really solidified this idea of Blackness
Right.
being inherently linked to enslavement,
Right.
making it incredibly difficult for free Black individuals
Yes.
to claim their rights. And we see this play out
Yes.
in subsequent cases like Prigg v. Pennsylvania in 1842,
Right.
where the Supreme Court reinforced that
Right.
presumption of slave status.
And then, of course, there's the infamous Dred Scott v. Sanford decision in 1857.
Right.
To think that the highest court in the land declared no Black person,
Wow.
enslaved or free, could ever be a citizen of
Yeah.
the United States.
Wow. Yeah. Truly a low point.
It was devastating, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it was a devastating blow to the fight for equality.
Right.
The legacy of slavery was so deeply entrenched that even after it was legally abolished, the legal system itself continued to operate under this assumption.
It makes you wonder how much progress was really made during Reconstruction if the courts were still upholding these discriminatory views.
Right.
Our sources delve into that period.
Okay.
And one detail that jumped out at me was a statistic about Phillips County, Arkansas. At the start of the 20th century, despite being 75% of the population, no Black person had served on a jury in 30 years.
That's a stark illustration of the systematic disenfranchisement that took place despite the promises of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
The efforts to maintain white dominance during and after Reconstruction were relentless. They were, and the sources detail various mechanisms used to achieve that.
Oh, really?
We see poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, all designed to exclude Black voters.
Yeah.
It's disheartening to see how determined they were to undermine the progress that had been made.
And it wasn't just the legal maneuvers.
Right.
There was also widespread violence and intimidation.
Right.
The Supreme Court's decision in Cruikshank in 1876 was a major setback by gutting the enforcement acts, which were meant to protect Black citizens from violence. The court essentially gave a free pass to groups like the Ku Klux Klan.
And the Wilmington race riot of 1898, described in one of our sources, stands out as a horrifying example of white supremacist violence aimed at seizing political power.
These events highlight the fragility of the progress made during Reconstruction. And how quickly things could unravel when those in power were determined to maintain that existing racial hierarchy.
It's a stark reminder that the fight for equality has always been met with fierce resistance.
It has.
Speaking of which, we have to talk about the era of Jim Crow itself.
Okay.
Even the term itself, originating from a minstrel show character, reflects the dehumanizing attitudes of the time.
Yeah, it perfectly encapsulates that system of laws and customs designed to enforce racial segregation and inequality that became known as Jim Crow. And sadly, the Supreme Court played a significant role in legitimizing that system.
The Plessy v. Ferguson decision in 1896, which upheld separate but equal, was a colossal blow to equality.
It was.
We know now that those separate facilities were never truly equal.
Never.
Our sources detail the stark disparities in education, housing, public accommodations.
It's crucial to understand that segregation wasn't just about physical separation. It was about limiting opportunities. And controlling every aspect of Black life.
The sources delve into the pervasive nature of segregation, extending to education, housing, the military, and even sports.
Wow.
The story of Jack Johnson. The first Black heavyweight boxing champion, is a prime example. It's almost unbelievable the lengths the government went to just to bring him down. Simply because his success and his lifestyle challenged the prevailing notions of white superiority.
His case is a stark reminder of the lengths the system would go to uphold white supremacy using the Mann Act, which was meant to combat prostitution to target him, was a blatant attempt to punish Black excellence. It reveals this deep-seated anxiety surrounding Black success, especially in a field as symbolic as boxing. If a Black man can dominate a sport that represents strength and masculinity, it directly challenges the entire racial hierarchy.
It's incredible. If you're enjoying this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode. You can also find Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube for more thought-provoking content. Now back to our discussion. It's clear that Jim Crow was a brutal system.
It was.
But our sources also highlight the resistance and resilience of Black people during this time.
Absolutely.
Black communities constantly pushed back against oppression. From everyday acts of defiance to organized movements for social change. And speaking of organized movements, we can't overlook the Great Migration. This massive movement of Black people from the South to the North, seeking better opportunities and escaping the Jim Crow South, had a profound impact on American society.
It did. It's a testament to the enduring hope for a better life. And the willingness to take extraordinary risks to achieve it.
But even in the North, Black people faced discrimination. Our sources talk about the rise of racial restrictive covenants in housing, which were legal agreements that prevented Black people from buying or renting homes in certain neighborhoods.
These covenants were a way to maintain residential segregation, even in the absence of explicitly racist laws. And the effects are still felt today.
They are.
Contributing to the racial wealth gap we see.
And even when those covenants were eventually deemed illegal, white flight emerged. White residents would abandon neighborhoods.
It's a persistent pattern.
It is.
Throughout history, isn't it? This desire to maintain racial separation, to avoid integration at all costs.
It shows that even when legal barriers are removed, the social and economic forces that drive segregation can be incredibly powerful. And speaking of economic barriers, we have to talk about the challenges faced by Black entrepreneurs and inventors during this era.
It's a part of history that's often overlooked.
It is.
These individuals had to overcome incredible obstacles to succeed in a system designed to stifle their progress.
Take Garrett Morgan, for example. The brilliant inventor of the gas mask and the traffic signal. The sources mention that he had to hire a white actor to pretend to be the inventor just to sell his products to white people.
It's a mind-boggling example of how deep-seated bias Could be.
Right.
Even a life-saving invention, like the gas mask, couldn't overcome the prejudice associated with the Black inventor.
And unfortunately, his experience wasn't unique.
Right.
The story of Vivian Thomas and Dr. Alfred Blaylock is another striking example.
Right.
Thomas, a Black lab technician, played a critical role in developing the groundbreaking surgical technique for blue baby syndrome.
Right.
Yet he was never given proper credit during his
Wow.
lifetime.
It was only decades later that his contributions were finally recognized.
That's tragic.
It's a tragic example of Black brilliance being overshadowed and exploited by a system that refused to acknowledge their worth.
These stories highlight a broader pattern of silencing Black voices and minimizing their contributions across various fields, from science and medicine to the arts and literature.
This cultural erasure is a subtle but insidious form of oppression that has lasting consequences. It distorts our understanding of history and perpetuates the idea that Black achievement is somehow exceptional, rather than a testament to the talent and resilience of Black people.
It's a reminder of how much work remains to be done to truly acknowledge and celebrate the full spectrum of Black contributions to our society.
Absolutely.
And this issue of erasure extends to how we perceive and understand the history of incarceration in America.
Absolutely. During Jim Crow, Black people were often arrested and imprisoned on trumped-up charges, essentially to provide cheap labor for farms and industries. This system of forced labor laid the groundwork for the mass incarceration crisis we see today, where Black people are disproportionately represented in the prison population.
It's chilling to think that even after slavery was abolished, new ways were found to control and exploit Black bodies.
The sources also delve into the horrific acts of racial terror that were used to enforce Jim Crow, particularly lynchings.
Lynchings weren't just random acts of violence. They were public spectacles meant to terrorize Black communities and reinforce white supremacy.
Absolutely. They sent a clear message that Black lives were disposable and could be taken with impunity.
The psychological impact of this constant threat of violence is unimaginable.
Unimaginable. This culture of fear had a lasting impact on Black communities, creating a sense of trauma that has been passed down through generations.
And that trauma is still felt today in many ways. It's a reminder that the wounds of the past run deep and continue to shape our present. But despite this horrific oppression, Black people never stopped fighting for their rights.
They never stopped.
Absolutely.
From the early civil rights activists like Ida B. Wells and W.E.B. Du Bois to the leaders of the modern civil rights movement like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, there was a constant push for equality.
And that brings us to the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954.
Well, Brown v. Board of Education was a monumental victory in declaring state-sponsored segregation in public schools unconstitutional. It didn't erase the centuries of discrimination that preceded it.
Southern states employed various tactics to resist desegregation.
Oh, wow.
From white flight and school closures to outright violence. It was a long and arduous battle for Black communities to claim their right to equal education.
And even when schools were technically desegregated, other forms of segregation persisted. Practices like tracking, where Black students were often placed in lower-level classes, regardless of their abilities, emerged as a more subtle way to maintain inequality.
It's a reminder that even with legal victories, the legacy of Jim Crow could manifest in new and insidious ways.
It could.
And the Supreme Court's role in enforcing Brown was inconsistent at best. The Milliken v. Bradley case in 1974, which ruled that school districts weren't responsible for desegregating. If the segregation was caused by housing patterns. Rather than explicit policies. Dealt a major blow to integration efforts.
It essentially allowed white communities to continue segregating themselves through housing policies, effectively undermining the spirit of Brown and perpetuating the cycle of inequality.
It's a stark reminder that legal victories alone aren't enough to dismantle deep-seated systemic racism.
And that brings us to the present day, where the legacy of Jim Crow is still very much alive, shaping the lives of Black people and influencing American society as a whole. We'll delve into these modern-day manifestations of discrimination in the second part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned, because we're going to explore how these historical forces continue to shape the realities of race and equality in America today.
Excellent.
So stay with us.
Okay. So it's fascinating how deeply the legacy of Jim Crow continues to influence American society. I mean, we see it in the persistent racial disparities that exist across various aspects of life, education and healthcare, to the criminal justice system and economic opportunities.
It's disheartening to see that despite all the progress that's been made, these disparities remain so deeply entrenched.
It is.
One of the sources makes a really compelling point. It challenges this idea of a post-racial society.
Right.
The author argues that this myth is actually harmful because it allows us to ignore the very real and persistent effects of discrimination.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
This notion that we've somehow moved past racism is a form of denial that prevents us from addressing the root causes of inequality. Yeah. It's like saying, we passed the Civil Rights Act, so racism is solved.
Right.
But it's simply not that simple.
Right. And the sources really drive this point home with some hard-hitting data.
Yeah.
What stood out to me was the evidence showing that even when you control for economic factors, significant racial disparities persist.
That's a crucial point.
It is.
It debunks the myth that racial inequality is purely a matter of class or poverty.
Yeah.
While poverty certainly plays a role, the data shows that even Black people with the same income and education levels as white people still face disadvantages.
It's like this invisible barrier.
It's a legacy of Jim Crow that continues to hold Black people back regardless of their individual achievements.
And those barriers manifest in various ways.
Yeah.
From subtle biases in hiring and promotion decisions to outright racial profiling by law enforcement.
The source material's discussion of the war on drugs and its disproportionate impact on Black communities is a prime example.
It's a clear example of how systemic racism operates.
Yeah.
The laws might appear race-neutral on the surface, but the way they're enforced perpetuates these disparities.
Yes.
The war on drugs has had devastating consequences for Black communities, tearing apart families, destabilizing neighborhoods, and creating a cycle of poverty and disenfranchisement.
Yes.
That's incredibly difficult to break free from.
And this cycle is fueled in part by implicit bias.
Yes.
That unconscious association of Blackness with criminality. That's so deeply embedded in our culture.
The sources even discuss how this bias can lead to false accusations.
Absolutely.
And wrongful convictions.
Yes.
Where Black people are unjustly targeted based on unfounded suspicions.
It's a stark reminder of the power of stereotypes and how easily they can be used to justify violence and injustice.
Tragically, we see this play out in the countless cases of police brutality and racial profiling that continue to make headlines.
Right. Cases like Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile.
The list goes on and on.
The list goes on.
It's heartbreaking to see how these deeply rooted prejudices continue to have fatal consequences.
These names represent a collective trauma that weighs heavily on Black communities.
Yeah.
The persistent fear of being targeted simply because of one's race is a reality that many Black people live with every day.
It's a sobering reminder that the fight for racial justice is far from over.
It is.
The sources also highlight how Black people are disproportionately affected by environmental racism.
Right.
Where toxic waste dumps and polluting industries are often located in Black neighborhoods.
It's a form of systemic neglect that exposes Black communities to greater environmental hazards and health risks.
Yes.
It reflects a deeply ingrained disregard for Black lives and well-being.
It's like saying that Black communities are somehow less deserving of clean air, clean water, and basic health protection.
Absolutely.
It's a blatant injustice.
It is.
That demands attention and action.
Yes.
The legacy of Jim Crow is evident in these patterns of discrimination.
Right.
And it's clear that we have to be honest about these disparities if we're ever going to dismantle the structures of systemic racism.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We need to acknowledge these hard truths if we want to create a more just and equitable society.
And that brings us to the question of what can be done to address these persistent inequalities.
Okay.
Our sources offer a range of potential solutions, and I'm curious to get your perspective on them.
Okay.
One idea that's proposed is creating a federal constitutional amendment guaranteeing the right to a quality education for all children.
Wow.
Regardless of race or socioeconomic background.
That's a bold proposal.
It is.
That gets to the heart of the issue.
Right.
Addressing the funding disparities
Yes.
between predominantly white and predominantly black schools is crucial for achieving educational equity.
Right.
A constitutional amendment would send a powerful message.
It would.
That education is a fundamental right for all, not a privilege reserved for some.
I agree. It would be a significant step towards leveling the playing field.
It would.
And ensuring that every child has the opportunity to reach their full potential.
However, it's important to acknowledge that such an amendment would likely face strong opposition from those who believe education is a local issue.
Right.
Or who oppose any form of government intervention in education.
Right.
It would be a challenging battle.
It would.
To get such an amendment passed.
Right.
But the potential impact on educational equity makes it a fight worth having.
Absolutely. Another solution proposed in the source material is criminalizing private acts of racial discrimination.
Okay.
Currently, the focus is primarily on state action.
Right.
But the author argues that this is insufficient to address the pervasiveness of racism in everyday life.
I think that's an important point.
Yeah.
So much of the discrimination that Black people face occurs in the private sphere, in housing, employment, and even in casual interactions.
Yes.
While it might be challenging to enforce, criminalizing these acts would send a strong message that racism is unacceptable in any form.
Yes.
And would provide victims with legal recourse that they currently lack.
It would be a powerful statement.
It would.
That society is truly committed to eradicating racism, even in its most subtle forms.
Of course, there would need to be clear guidelines and safeguards in place to prevent abuse and ensure that the law is applied fairly.
Right.
But I think it's a conversation worth having.
Yes, it is.
Especially given the limitations of current legal frameworks in addressing private acts of discrimination.
Another frequently discussed solution is reparations.
Yes.
Which is the idea of compensating Black people for the harms of slavery and Jim Crow.
Reparations is a complex issue, and it's understandable that it evokes strong emotions and diverse perspectives.
Yes.
However, I think it's crucial to engage in a thoughtful and respectful dialogue about how to address the historical injustices that have led to the persistent racial wealth gap.
I agree. It's not simply about cutting a check.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the deep and lasting harm that has been inflicted upon Black communities.
Yes.
And taking concrete steps to repair that damage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Reparations could take many forms, from direct payments and investments in Black communities to educational opportunities and healthcare initiatives.
Yes.
It's about creating a more equitable playing field.
Right.
And acknowledging the truth of our history, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be.
It's about recognizing that the effects of slavery and Jim Crow are not confined to the past.
Right.
They continue to shape the present and will impact the future unless we take deliberate action to address them.
It's also about understanding that reparations are not just a financial transaction.
Right.
They're about achieving a form of moral reckoning and creating the foundation for a more just and equitable society.
And speaking of creating a more equitable society, the source material also emphasizes the importance of stronger enforcement of fair housing laws.
Absolutely. Residential segregation is a major driver of inequality.
Yes.
And we need to do everything we can to combat it.
Yeah.
It affects access to quality education, healthcare, job opportunities, and even exposure to environmental hazards.
Right. It's all interconnected.
It's all interconnected.
Fair housing is not just about where people live.
Right.
It's about creating truly integrated communities that offer equal opportunities for all residents.
It requires addressing both the historical legacy of discriminatory housing policies and the ongoing practices that perpetuate segregation.
Right.
This includes things like addressing discriminatory lending practices, combating steering by real estate agents, and promoting affordable housing options in diverse communities.
It's a multifaceted issue.
It is.
That requires a comprehensive approach to truly dismantle the systems that maintain residential segregation.
And it's important to remember that dismantling these systems requires more than just policy changes.
Right.
It also requires changing hearts and minds, challenging implicit biases, and promoting a culture of inclusion and respect for all.
It's a reminder that while policy changes are crucial, they're only part of the equation.
Right.
we also need to address the individual attitudes and behaviors that contribute to discrimination and prejudice.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play
Yes.
in creating a more just and equitable society.
Yes.
It starts with being willing to examine our own biases, to challenge the status quo, and to advocate for change.
The source material really emphasizes this point.
Yes.
The importance of self-reflection.
Yes.
And critical examination of our own beliefs and actions.
It's about recognizing that racism is not just something that bad people do.
Right.
It's often embedded in our systems and institutions, and we all have a responsibility to challenge it, even in its most subtle forms.
The source material also highlights the role of Black empowerment and self-help.
Absolutely.
In the fight for racial justice.
Throughout history, Black communities have demonstrated incredible strength and resilience in creating their own institutions, businesses, and support systems to uplift and empower themselves.
It's inspiring to see how, in the face of oppression, Black communities have created spaces of hope, resilience, and resistance.
From the Black church and the Black press to countless mutual aid societies and community organizations, Black people have consistently found ways to resist oppression and build a better future for themselves and future generations.
And it's important to remember that Black empowerment is not about separatism.
Right.
It's about creating a sense of agency and self-determination.
Exactly.
It's about building power within Black communities to challenge systemic racism and achieve equality.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing the strength and resilience that already exists within Black communities and supporting their efforts to thrive.
And that support can take many forms.
Right.
From supporting Black-owned businesses and organizations to advocating for policies that promote racial justice to simply celebrating Black excellence in all its forms.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that Black lives matter, that Black voices matter, that Black contributions matter.
Yes.
And working to create a world where that truth is reflected in every aspect of our society.
Absolutely.
If you're finding this deep dive as insightful as I am, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and family.
Right.
You can also find Allison Knows on Spotify and YouTube for more thought-provoking discussions.
Okay.
Now let's continue exploring the complex and multifaceted legacy of Jim Crow.
Okay, one aspect that we haven't touched on yet is the psychological toll that racism takes on Black individuals.
Right.
The constant stress of dealing with discrimination, microaggressions, and the threat of violence can have a profound impact on mental and emotional well-being.
It's a heavy burden to carry.
It is.
And it's something that we often overlook.
Yes, we do.
When discussing the impact of racism.
Yes.
One of the sources talks about John Henryism, which is the idea that Black people often feel pressure to work twice as hard and be twice as good just to be seen as equal.
It's a coping mechanism, a way to navigate a system that's rigged against you. But it can also be incredibly exhausting and detrimental to one's health.
It is.
It's like running a race with weights strapped to your ankles.
Yes.
You might be able to keep up for a while, but eventually it takes its toll.
It's a constant battle against not only external barriers, but also the internalized pressure to prove yourself worthy in a society that constantly tells you you're not.
Right. And then there's the issue of internalized racism, which many Black people struggle with. Growing up in a society that constantly reinforces messages of Black inferiority can lead to a sense of self-doubt and self-hatred.
It's a heartbreaking consequence of living in a culture that perpetuates negative stereotypes and devalues Black lives.
It is.
It's a form of psychological violence that can be just as damaging as physical violence. And it's something that we need to be more aware of.
We do.
And actively combat.
Absolutely. Addressing internalized racism requires challenging those negative messages. Affirming Black identity and beauty. And celebrating Black excellence in all its forms.
Exactly.
It's about reclaiming power and rejecting the narratives that seek to diminish Black worth.
It's a process of healing and self-love. That is essential for dismantling the legacy of racism. And creating a world where Black people can thrive.
And it's a journey that requires support from allies who can help challenge those negative messages and create spaces where Black people feel safe, seen, and valued.
So given the psychological toll that racism takes, where do we go from here? What can be done to create a society where Black people can truly heal and thrive?
Well, as we've discussed, there are many systemic changes that need to be made to address the root causes of racism and inequality. But there are also things that we can do on an individual level to promote healing. Right.
And create a more just and equitable world.
I'm eager to hear your thoughts on this.
Okay.
The source material offers some potential solutions, and I'm curious to delve into them further.
Okay. I think one of the most important things we can do is educate ourselves and others about the history of racism and its ongoing impact. We need to be honest about the difficult truths of our past and present. And we need to be willing to challenge our own biases and assumptions.
Education is definitely a crucial starting point.
It is.
We need to go beyond the surface level understanding of history and really grapple with the complexities of race and racism.
That means reading books, watching documentaries, listening to podcasts like this one, and engaging in meaningful conversations with people from different backgrounds. It's about being open to learning and growing. And being willing to confront our own discomfort.
And it's not just about passively consuming information.
It's about actively seeking out diverse perspectives. And challenging the narratives that we've been taught.
Exactly. It's about critically examining the information we encounter, asking questions, and being willing to change our minds when presented with new evidence.
It's about recognizing that learning about racism is an ongoing process.
It is.
And it's something that we should all be committed to throughout our lives.
Absolutely. And education isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about transforming our attitudes and behaviors. It's about developing empathy, understanding, and a commitment to dismantling racism in all its forms.
It's about recognizing the humanity of all people.
It is.
Regardless of their race or background. And treating everyone with dignity and respect.
And that recognition requires us to challenge the stereotypes and biases that we've internalized, to be mindful of our language and actions, and to be willing to speak up against racism when we see it.
It's about being an ally to Black people and other marginalized groups and using our voices and our platforms to advocate for justice and equality.
It is.
And allyship is not just about words. It's about actions.
Absolutely.
It's about showing up for Black communities, supporting their struggles, and amplifying their voices.
It's about putting our privilege to work for good and using our resources to dismantle the systems that perpetuate racism and oppression. And it's about recognizing that the fight for racial justice is an ongoing process.
It is.
That requires sustained effort and commitment. There will be setbacks and challenges along the way, but we can't afford to give up.
No.
We have to keep pushing forward, keep learning, keep growing, and keep fighting for a better world for all.
I couldn't agree more. Stakes are too high to do anything less. Another important aspect of creating a more just and equitable society is addressing the economic disparities that have been created and perpetuated by racism.
Absolutely. We need to be honest about the ways in which systemic racism has created and maintained a racial wealth gap. And we need to take concrete steps to close that gap.
That means investing in Black communities, supporting Black-owned businesses, and creating opportunities for economic advancement.
Absolutely.
It also means advocating for policies that promote economic equity. Like affordable housing, access to quality health care, and fair lending practices.
It's about creating a system where everyone has a fair shot at success, regardless of their race or background.
Exactly. And it means dismantling the systems that perpetuate poverty and disenfranchisement. Like mass incarceration and the school-to-prison pipeline.
Absolutely. These systems disproportionately harm Black communities and create cycles of poverty and inequality that are incredibly difficult to break.
We need to be investing in restorative justice approaches that focus on healing and rehabilitation rather than punishment. And we need to be creating pathways to education, employment, and economic stability for all.
It's about shifting our focus from punishment to opportunity. From control to empowerment.
And it's about recognizing that true justice requires not just equality under the law, but also equity and outcomes.
Absolutely.
It's about creating a world where everyone has the resources and opportunities they need to thrive regardless of their race or background. The source material also highlights the critical role of criminal justice reform in the fight for racial justice.
The criminal justice system as it currently stands is deeply flawed and disproportionately harms Black people and other people of color.
Yes.
We need to be honest about the ways in which systemic racism infects every stage of the system, from policing and arrests to sentencing and incarceration.
It's a system that is in desperate need of transformation.
It is.
We need to be ending mass incarceration, addressing police brutality, and eliminating racial bias in every aspect of the system.
Yes, and we need to be investing in community-based solutions that address the root causes of crime and promote safety and well-being for all.
It's about creating a system that is truly just and equitable.
It is.
One that protects the rights and dignity of all people.
Right, and that requires us to fundamentally rethink our approach to crime and punishment, to move away from a punitive mindset and towards a more humane and compassionate system.
The sources also emphasize the importance of voting rights as a key to political power and representation.
Absolutely. The right to vote is fundamental to a democracy.
It is.
And we need to be doing everything we can to protect and expand access to the ballot box.
That means fighting against voter suppression efforts.
Right.
Like voter ID laws and gerrymandering, which disproportionately disenfranchise Black and brown voters.
Absolutely.
And it means supporting efforts to restore voting rights to people with felony convictions who have often served their time and deserve to have their voices heard in our democracy. It's about ensuring that everyone has an equal say in the decisions that affect their lives and their communities.
Exactly.
And it's about electing leaders who are committed to racial justice and who will fight for policies that promote equity and opportunity for all.
Yes, it's about creating a political system that is truly representative of the people.
Right.
And that works to dismantle the structures of systemic racism.
So where do we go from here?
Okay.
What can listeners do to be a part of this movement for change?
I think it starts with recognizing that we all have a role to play no matter how big or small.
Absolutely. Whether it's educating ourselves and others, challenging our own biases, speaking out against racism, supporting Black-led organizations, or advocating for policy changes, we can all make a difference.
We can.
It's about being active, engaged citizens and holding ourselves and our leaders accountable for creating a more just and equitable world.
It is, and it's about recognizing that the fight for racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint. There will be setbacks and challenges along the way.
Right.
But we have to stay committed, stay engaged, and keep pushing forward.
We have a responsibility to future generations to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive free from the legacy of racism and oppression.
We do. I believe that we can create that world if we work together with determination, compassion, and a shared commitment to justice.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
But I think it's important to emphasize that this is just a starting point.
It is. There's always more to learn, more to understand, and more to do.
The legacy of Jim Crow is complex and far-reaching.
It is.
And dismantling it requires a sustained and multifaceted approach.
It requires us to be honest about the past, present and future, and to be willing to challenge ourselves and each other to do better.
It requires us to listen to and learn from those who have been most affected by racism and to center their experiences and perspectives in our efforts to create change.
It does.
It requires us to be humble, to be open to new ideas, and to be willing to make mistakes along the way.
Absolutely.
And it requires us to be hopeful, to believe that a better world is possible, and to work tirelessly to make that vision a reality.
Right. I'm grateful for this opportunity to engage in this conversation with you and with our listeners.
I am too.
I believe that these conversations are essential.
They are.
For raising awareness, building understanding, and inspiring action.
I agree, and I'm grateful to you, our expert, for sharing your insights and expertise with us today.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been a truly enlightening conversation.
Thank you.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
We hope that this conversation has challenged you to think critically about the legacy of Jim Crow and its ongoing impact on our society. We hope it has inspired you to learn more, to get involved, and to be a part of the movement for racial justice.
Absolutely.
We believe that together, we can create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive free from the shackles of racism and oppression.
We can part a world where the ghosts of Jim Crow are finally laid to rest.
And we hope you'll join us on that journey. We'll be back next week for another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep fighting for a better world.
This has been such a powerful conversation.
It really has.
You know, it's so clear that the legacy of Jim Crow is still very much with us, shaping not only policies and institutions, but also like individual lives and experiences.
It's woven into the fabric of American society.
Yeah.
And unraveling it requires this deep understanding of how it continues to manifest in both overt and subtle ways.
One of the things that's really struck me throughout this deep dive is the sheer resilience of Black people.
Oh, absolutely.
In the face of such overwhelming adversity.
It's truly remarkable.
It is, despite the constant barrage of discrimination, violence, and dehumanization, Black communities have never stopped fighting for their rights, for their dignity, and for a better future.
And the sources we've explored
Yeah.
highlight countless examples of this resilience.
Yes.
From the everyday acts of resistance during Jim Crow,
right,
to the organized movements that fought for civil rights,
yes,
to the ongoing efforts to dismantle systemic racism today.
It's a testament to the strength, courage, and determination of Black people.
It is.
And it's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure and triumph.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that while we've talked a lot about the challenges and the injustices,
yes,
there's also a lot of beauty, creativity, and joy in Black culture and experience.
Absolutely. Black culture is rich, vibrant, and diverse,
yes,
and it has made immeasurable contributions to American society and to the world.
From music and art to literature and cuisine to fashion and dance, Black creativity has shaped and enriched every aspect of our culture.
Absolutely, and it's important to celebrate those contributions, not just during Black History Month, but all year round.
Yes.
It's about recognizing that Black joy, Black love, and Black excellence are just as important as acknowledging the struggles and the injustices.
It's about seeing the full spectrum of Black humanity.
Right.
And appreciating the beauty and the strength that have emerged from adversity.
Absolutely.
And it's about supporting Black artists, creators, and entrepreneurs, and amplifying their voices and their work.
And creating a world where Black people can not only survive, but thrive.
Yes.
Where their talents are celebrated and where their contributions are valued.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
okay,
I want to circle back to the question of what we can do to create a more just and equitable society.
Okay.
We've discussed a lot of potential solutions, but I'm wondering if you could distill it down to a few key takeaways for our listeners.
I think the most important thing is to remember that dismantling systemic racism is a collective effort. It requires all of us to be actively engaged in the fight for justice.
It's not enough to simply be not racist.
Right.
We have to be actively anti-racist.
Right.
We have to be willing to challenge our own biases.
Yes.
To educate ourselves and others and to use our voices and our platforms to advocate for change.
And we have to be persistent. The fight for racial justice has been going on for centuries, and there's still a long way to go.
There is.
But we can't give up hope.
No.
We have to believe that a better world is possible.
Yes.
And we have to keep working towards that vision even when it feels like progress is slow.
Here are a few concrete actions that our listeners can take to be part of this movement for change.
Okay, first, educate yourself about the history of racism and its ongoing impact.
Yes.
Read books, watch documentaries, listen to podcasts, attend workshops, and engage in conversations with people who have different experiences than your own.
Knowledge is power, and the more we understand about the complexities of race and racism, the better equipped we'll be to challenge it.
Second, challenge your own biases and assumptions.
Yes.
We all have biases.
We do.
Whether we're aware of them or not.
Yeah.
It's important to be introspective, to examine our own beliefs and behaviors, and to be willing to confront our own discomfort.
It's not always easy to admit that we have biases.
It's not.
But it's a necessary step towards becoming more anti-racist.
Third, speak out against racism when you see it.
Yes.
Whether it's a casual comment, a discriminatory policy, or an act of violence, it's important to use your voice to challenge racism in all its forms.
Silence is complicity.
It is.
And we have a moral obligation to speak up for what's right.
Absolutely. Fourth, support Black-led organizations and initiatives that are working to dismantle systemic racism.
Yes.
These organizations are on the front lines of the fight for justice, and they need our support.
They do donate your time, your money, your resources.
Yes.
Or simply amplify their voices on social media.
fifth, advocate for policy changes that promote racial justice.
Yes.
Contact your elected officials, attend town hall meetings, and vote for candidates who are committed to dismantling systemic racism.
Policy changes are crucial for creating lasting change.
Yes.
And we need to hold our leaders accountable for making those changes.
Absolutely. And finally, remember that the fight for racial justice is a marathon, not a sprint.
It is.
There will be setbacks and challenges along the way, but we can't give up.
We can't.
We have to stay engaged, stay informed, and stay committed to creating a more just and equitable world for all.
I believe that a better world is possible.
Me too.
But it's going to take all of us working together to make it happen.
It is.
This deep dive has been a powerful reminder of the work that still needs to be done, but it's also given me hope.
It has me too. It's been inspiring to see the passion, the commitment, and the creativity of the people who are fighting for racial justice.
And it's a reminder that we're not alone in this fight.
We're not.
There are countless people all over the world who are working to create a more just and equitable society.
There are, and together we can make a difference.
If you're feeling inspired to take action, we encourage you to visit the Allison Knows website, where you'll find a list of resources and organizations that are working to dismantle systemic racism.
Great. And you'll also find links to the sources that we've discussed in this deep dive, so you can continue to learn and explore these issues further.
And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends and family.
Yes.
The more people we can engage in this conversation, the more powerful our collective impact will be.
It will be. Thank you for joining us on this journey of learning and discovery.
It's been an honor to share this space with you and with our listeners.
And remember, the fight for racial justice continues.
It does.
Let's keep pushing forward together.
Thank you for listening to the Allison Knows podcast. Follow Allison on Blue Sky, YouTube, and TikTok.